2 years after my husband passed away, a notary called me on a gray Tuesday morning and said, "Mrs. Halcott, your husband left a sealed recording with our firm before he died. I need you to come in as soon as possible. And please, don't mention this to anyone in his family. Not yet." I was standing at the kitchen window when the call came, watching the first snow of November settle across the back field. Clarence had planted 3 apple trees along the fence line the summer before he got sick, and I'd been in the habit of checking on them every morning, the way you check on something you're not quite ready to let go. I set down my coffee mug so hard it clattered against the sill. "I'm sorry," I said. "A recording?" "A video statement," the man said. His name was Mr. Caldwell. He recorded it 14 months before his passing and specifically instructed us to hold it until one of 2 conditions were met. The first condition was any legal dispute involving his estate. Mrs. Halcott, that condition has now been triggered. I didn't sleep that night. I want to tell you who Clarence was first, because none of what came after makes any sense without understanding the kind of man he was. We met when I was 26 and he was 29. Both of us working subjobs near Lake Champlain. He was a civil engineer who could spend 45 minutes explaining how a drainage culvert worked and somehow make you feel like that was the most interesting conversation you'd ever had. We married the following spring, settled in the Vermont farmhouse that had belonged to his family for 3 generations, and spent the next 38 years building a life there. I taught in the school library for 22 of those years. Clarence worked for the county until he retired at 63. We raised our daughter, grew a vegetable garden every summer, argued about nothing important, and were deeply, quietly happy. He died of a stroke on a Wednesday evening in October, 2 years ago, 67 years old, no warning. I came downstairs from folding laundry and found him in his chair, and that was the end of the life I had known. His brother, my brother-in-law, cried at the funeral. He stood beside me at the burial and held my arm and said, "You'll always be family, Mildred. Always." I believed him then. I don't know how to explain what it felt like to stop believing him later. The morning after Mr. Caldwell's call, I put on the same gray blazer I'd worn to Clarence's funeral and drove 40 minutes into Burlington. Mr. Caldwell was in his late 50s. A quiet, careful man who poured me water before he said a word and waited until I was settled before he began. "3 weeks ago," he said, "your brother-in-law and his wife retained legal counsel and filed a petition in Chittenden County Probate Court. They are contesting the transfer of the Halcott farmhouse to your name. They argue that the property, having been in the Halcott bloodline for 3 generations, should revert to the surviving Halcott family line upon Clarence's death, which, in their interpretation, means it belongs to your brother-in-law rather than to you as a surviving spouse." The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with sound. "That property is my home," I said. "Clarence and I lived there for 38 years. His name and my name were both on the deed. He left it to me in the will." "I know," Mr. Caldwell said gently, "and that's exactly why Clarence left what he left." He turned a laptop toward me. "He recorded this 14 months before he died. He was not ill at the time, at least not in any way either of you knew about. He simply wanted to make sure you were protected." He pressed play. Clarence appeared on the screen in his study. Our study. The room with the green lamp and the shelves of engineering books and the old photograph of his parents on their wedding day. He was wearing his blue flannel shirt. He looked tired, in a way I recognized only in retrospect, the way a person looks when they're carrying something they haven't told anyone. "Millie," he said, and just hearing him say my name like that, in that voice, I had to press my hand to my mouth to keep from making a sound. "If you're watching this, then my brother has done what I've been afraid he would do. I'm sorry. I should have warned you directly. I kept hoping I was wrong about him. I kept hoping the man I grew up with was still somewhere inside the one he's become." He paused. "He's not." He explained it slowly, the way Clarence always explained difficult things, carefully, without drama, with the precision of someone who'd spent decades working with facts. Over the course of 11 years, my brother-in-law had borrowed money from us 7 separate times, not gifts. Loans, with signed promissory notes, notarized and filed. The total came to $180,000. Medical bills for his wife, a failed business venture, a second mortgage he couldn't cover, his son's college debt that somehow became Clarence's problem. Each time, Clarence had helped. Each time, my brother-in-law had signed a note and promised to repay. He had repaid nothing. "I want you to understand something," Clarence said on the screen, leaning slightly forward. "Reginald doesn't believe I kept records. That's his mistake. Every note is in the gray lockbox in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. Mr. Caldwell has copies of all of them. The moment he files any claim against you, those notes become a counterclaim. He doesn't just owe you nothing, he owes the estate $180,000. He looked directly into the camera. "Fight, Millie. Don't let anyone tell you that house isn't yours. I spent my whole life building that place with you. It's yours. It has always been yours. I love you." The screen went dark. I sat in that office for a very long time. Mr. Caldwell let me collect myself before he walked me through the legal reality. My brother-in-law's petition was based on a creative and entirely unsupported interpretation of inheritance law. Vermont statute was clear. A surviving spouse's right to marital property superseded collateral heirs' claims, full stop. The argument that a property's bloodline history could override a valid will and deed was not a serious legal theory. It was theater. It was the kind of claim that gets filed by someone who is hoping the other party won't fight back. "He believes you're a 64-year-old widow living alone," Mr. Caldwell said. "He believes you'll be frightened enough to negotiate." "Then he hasn't been paying attention," I said. I drove home and sat in Clarence's study for the rest of the afternoon. I looked at the filing cabinet. I looked at the photograph of his parents. I looked at the apple trees through the window, already buried under 6 inches of snow, and I made my decision. My daughter called that evening. She lives in Portland now, works as a hospital administrator, and she has her father's habit of cutting straight to the point when something is wrong. "Mom, you sound strange. What's going on?" I told her everything. I waited for her to be shocked. Instead, after a silence that lasted about 4 seconds, she said, "How soon can I be there?" "Honey, you don't have to." "Mom." Her voice was very steady. "I'm coming Thursday. Book nothing, sign nothing, say nothing to anyone until I get there. Do you understand me?" I understood her. She arrived Thursday with a rolling suitcase and a laptop and the particular focus of someone who has managed large institutions and is now treating her mother's legal situation as a project that will be solved. She sat with me and Mr. Caldwell on Friday morning, asked careful questions, and by the time we left his office, she had a yellow legal pad covered in notes. "He's desperate," she said in the car. "This is what desperate looks like." She was right, as it turned out. Mr. Caldwell's discovery request came back within 2 weeks, and the picture it painted was not a pretty one. My brother-in-law's finances had been in freefall for nearly 4 years. He and his wife had taken a second mortgage on their own home in Montpelier. His business, a commercial landscaping operation, had lost its largest municipal contract and was operating at a loss. They were behind on property taxes. The lawsuit wasn't a matter of principle. It was a Hail Mary from 2 people who had run out of other options and had decided that the most available large asset within reach was my house. 14 days after my daughter arrived, they came to the farmhouse. I was in the kitchen when I heard the truck pull into the driveway. I looked out and saw my brother-in-law and his wife getting out, and I felt something that wasn't quite fear. It was closer to recognition, the way you feel when you've been expecting a particular storm and it finally arrives. I opened the door before they knocked. My brother-in-law looks like Clarence, the way a rough draft looks like a finished letter. Similar materials, entirely different result. He's shorter, quicker to flush, always slightly off balance in his face, as if his expressions don't quite match his thoughts. His wife stood slightly behind him, which I had noticed she always did when he was doing something she wasn't entirely sure about. "Mildred," he said, "we need to talk." "I have nothing to say to you outside the presence of my attorney," I told him. "Come on now." His voice shifted into the register I'd heard him use on Clarence when he was asking for money, warm, aggrieved, slightly wounded. "We're family. We don't need lawyers to have a conversation." "You made it a legal matter," I said, "not me." His wife spoke then, and I'll give her this. She was a better actor than he was. Her eyes actually filled with tears. "Mildred, we're not trying to take anything from you. We just feel that a property that's been in the Halcott family for 3 generations shouldn't pass out of the family entirely." "Surely Clarence would have wanted." "Clarence left a video," I said. "In it, he tells me exactly what he wanted. You're welcome to watch it in court." Something moved across my brother-in-law's face then, a flicker of something I could only call miscalculation. "We're willing to settle," he said, dropping the warmth. "You keep the contents of the house, the cars, the accounts. We take the property. You'd have enough to buy yourself a nice place in a retirement community somewhere. That's a reasonable outcome." "You want me to give you my home," I said, "in exchange for the right to leave it." "We want what's fair." "What's fair," I said quietly, "is the $180,000 you owe this estate in outstanding loans. I'd start there." His wife made a sound. My brother-in-law went the particular shade of pale that I associated, from that moment on, with the look of a man whose strategy has just collapsed beneath him. "Get off my property," I said, "both of you now." They left. He peeled out of the driveway faster than was necessary, and I stood in the cold doorway watching until the truck disappeared around the bend. Then I went inside and called Mr. Caldwell. "They know about the promissory notes," I told him. "Good," he said. "That means they know what they're facing. Expect them to escalate before they back down. It's what people do when they're cornered." He was right. Within the week, their attorney, a man named Mr. Slade, who had the aggressive efficiency of someone billing by the quarter hour, filed an amended petition. In it, they claimed that Clarence had been in cognitive decline in the final years of his life, that I had exerted undue influence over his estate planning, and that the promissory notes themselves were fabricated or coerced. Mr. Caldwell called me when the filing came through and said, with a calmness that I found genuinely steadying, "They've overplayed their hand." A video recorded 14 months before his death, in which your husband demonstrates complete coherence, is going to be very difficult to argue around. And attacking the authenticity of notarized documents is a serious claim. They'd better be able to back it up. They couldn't. My daughter flew back to Portland for 3 weeks and returned 2 days before the hearing. She brought her laptop and a fresh legal pad and took the guest room, and in the evenings we sat at the kitchen table, and I told her every story I could remember about this house. The summer we replaced the roof ourselves to save money. The winter the heating system failed, and we spent 4 nights in sleeping bags by the fireplace. The morning Clarence planted those apple trees and told me he planned to watch our grandchildren pick apples from them someday. He loved this place, my daughter said. He loved us in this place, I said. There's a difference. The courthouse in Burlington smelled like old wood and floor wax, the particular smell of a building that has been settling into its foundations for a very long time. My daughter sat behind me. Mr. Caldwell sat beside me. Across the aisle, my brother-in-law sat with his wife and their attorney, and he did not look at me once in the first hour of the hearing. Their attorney opened with the narrative they'd constructed, the devoted surviving family member, watching helplessly as the family's generational property was signed away by a man in his declining years to a woman who had kept him isolated from his roots. He used words like undue influence and cognitive vulnerability and sentimental manipulation. He delivered it with great confidence. Then it was Mr. Caldwell's turn. He called their attorney's characterization of Clarence's mental state not merely unsupported but demonstrably false, and he asked the court's permission to submit two things into evidence: the video recording and the 7 notarized promissory notes. The judge, a woman named Judge Whitaker, who had the bearing of someone who had seen every variety of family grievance that money could produce, looked at the documents for a long moment and then looked at the screen where Clarence appeared. They played the video in full. I had seen it twice by then, but watching it in that room, with the overhead lights and the wooden benches, and my brother-in-law sitting 15 feet away, was different. Clarence was just so clearly himself, so completely the man I had known for 38 years. Deliberate, measured, specific, kind. He named each loan by date and amount. He explained the circumstances of each one. He named the notary. He referenced the drawer where the lockbox was kept. He concluded by looking directly into the camera and saying, "I know my wife. She will try to be reasonable with people who don't deserve it. I'm asking her not to this once. Fight." The courtroom was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when something has just landed that cannot be unmade. My brother-in-law's attorney made several attempts to recover. He argued the video was not legally binding. Judge Whitaker noted that it was submitted as supporting evidence, not as a testamentary document, and that its relevance to Clarence's state of mind was self-evident. He argued the promissory notes might have been signed under duress. Judge Whitaker asked, with a precision that left very little room to maneuver, whether he was prepared to substantiate that claim with evidence. He was not. My brother-in-law took the stand at his attorney's request. I had known this man for 38 years. I had watched him at birthday dinners and holiday tables, and the camping trip we all took to the Adirondacks in 1998 when the kids were small. Watching him try to explain away $180,000 in signed, notarized, witnessed loans was one of the stranger experiences of my life. He said Clarence had given him the money, gifts. Mr. Caldwell asked him to explain why each gift had been accompanied by a signed repayment agreement. He said Clarence had insisted on the paperwork for tax purposes, but both of them had understood it was never meant to be collected. Mr. Caldwell asked him to explain why Clarence had referenced these notes explicitly in a video recorded in the presence of a notary, had described them as outstanding debts owed to the estate, and had instructed his attorney to deploy them as a counterclaim in precisely this situation. My brother-in-law had no answer for that. His wife did not testify. I noticed her watching her husband from the gallery, and what I saw in her face was not what I expected. It wasn't defiance. It was exhaustion and something that looked very much like shame. Judge Whitaker took 40 minutes. When she returned to the bench, she removed her glasses and looked at the room with the directness of someone who had made up her mind and was not interested in softening what she was about to say. This court finds that the petition to contest the transfer of the Halcott farmhouse is without merit and is hereby dismissed in its entirety, she said. The property transfer as specified in Clarence Halcott's will is confirmed valid. The surviving spouse retains full title. I heard my daughter exhale behind me. Furthermore, Judge Whitaker continued, the counterclaim submitted by the respondent regarding outstanding debts owed to the Halcott estate is granted. The estate is owed $180,000 in documented, notarized principal. The court orders repayment on a structured schedule to be administered by the estate's attorney. She looked at my brother-in-law directly. Mr. Halcott, you borrowed money from your brother in good faith on his part and in bad faith on yours. You then attempted to claim an asset from his widow while simultaneously owing his estate a sum that would have meaningfully addressed your financial difficulties had you simply honored your word. This court has no patience for that particular variety of audacity. His attorney tried to speak. She didn't let him. We're adjourned. My daughter was the first one to reach me. She put both arms around me in the middle of the aisle, and neither of us said anything for a moment, because there wasn't anything to say that the moment hadn't already said. My brother-in-law walked past us on the way out. He didn't look at me. His wife, A half step behind him paused just for a second, and what she did surprised me. She looked at me and she said very quietly, "I'm sorry." Then she kept walking. I don't know what to do with that. Even now, I think about it sometimes. In the months after the ruling, my daughter helped me winterize the farmhouse properly. The old drafts we'd patched with weather stripping for years got real insulation, finally. I joined a memoir writing group in Burlington on Wednesday evenings, something I'd been meaning to do for years. The structured repayment began within 90 days, as the court had ordered, drawn from my brother-in-law's landscaping business income, 25% of each month's revenue until the debt was satisfied. Mr. Caldwell told me it would take approximately 6 years at their current cash flow. I didn't celebrate that. There was nothing to celebrate in it, not really. A man I had known for nearly 4 decades had chosen money over decency, and the courts had corrected him the way courts are supposed to, and now we would spend the next 6 years in the particular silence of strangers who share a last name and nothing else. What I did celebrate, quietly in my own way, was spring. The apple trees Clarence planted along the fence line bloomed that April, for the first time. 3 of them, white blossoms showing up one morning as if they'd always been planning it. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee, and I looked at them for a very long time. He had planted those trees because he intended for this place to go on growing, because he trusted me to still be here to watch it, because he knew, in the way that 38 years gives you the right to know someone, that I would fight when I needed to fight, and then come back to the kitchen and make coffee and look at the field and let life continue. I called my daughter that morning, told her the trees were blooming. "Dad would have loved that," she said. "He did love it," I told her. "That's why he planted them." There's something I want to say to anyone who's listening to this, who might be in the middle of something like what I went through, or afraid of it, or just trying to understand how a family can fracture along the line of money when it seemed so solid before. The fracture was there before the money. The money just finds it. But here is what else I know. The solid things are there too, if you built them. 38 years of a real life with a real man who thought ahead and kept his records and looked into a camera and said your name in the voice that still sounds like home. That is not nothing. That is, in the end, everything. Hold on to what's yours. Clarence did, and so did I.